Hey, welcome to the Disrupt Desk. We're here to get you caught up on everything that you missed in the health and biotech track with some analysis of what we saw on stage. But before that, some quick housekeeping notes. So you can use Crunch Match or networking to meet other folks at the show. So hit that Crunch Match button for curated meetings, or just hit Instant Meeting to be matched with someone at the show. We also have some awesome Startup Alley companies out there, so don't forget to check those out. And there's a brand new piece of the show this year. It's called the Disrupt Passport. Essentially, you can explore different parts of the show, and you'll win really cool prizes. I'm actually jealous that I can't win them myself. With that, let's get into the business of breaking down some of these panels. To help me break everything down, I'm going to bring on Daryl Etherington. He's our breaking news editor, and he also happens to be my co-host on the Found podcast. Hey, Daryl, do you think that Found is the best podcast, or?
Inarguably the best podcast, Jordan. And, if you just saw the panel that I just hosted, which got pretty intense, but that's kind of what Found's like. It's always an exciting thrill ride. So please go listen to our podcast. It's great.
Yeah, Daryl and I like to fight. So if you enjoy a fight, check out Found. We're going to be talking health and biotech on this panel. And while Daryl is amazing, he can't do it all. We're going to get some help from our good pal, Arvind Gupta. He's a partner at Mayfield. He leads engineering and biology for the firm, formerly of IndieBio. Thanks for joining us, Arvind.
My pleasure. I'm excited to be here. Thanks so much.
So let's kick things off. Our first conversation of the day was with you, Daryl. It was called Saving the World, and you asked Ugur, the Biotech CEO, about the origin story of the company, essentially how he decided to go from doing research at a university to actually starting a business. Let's take a look at the clip.
So we had really the experience that the first 10 months of preparing this kind of business plans, explaining that to experts, and coming up with competitor analysis. It was just taking time from our research. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And the question was, are we losing scientific quality because we are dealing with all that? Yeah. And then before making the decision, we really closed our eyes, yeah, and said we have now two options. We can just go, yeah, as we did, yeah, right. Or we can try it, yeah, and go through all these challenges, yeah. What do we want? And then we extrapolated 10 years later, and then we realized that we would never forgive us, yeah, if we would not go through this, yeah, because you will never know. Yeah?
Right.
So Arvind, there's so many things about starting and running a company that have nothing to do with the actual mission, right? So how do you advise founders around balancing kind of like the administrative work with their mission-oriented work?
Yeah, well, first, I just, before I launch into this, I think it's just amazing to see Ugur and my partner Urshit, who co-leads engineering biology with me, he helped stop the deadly pandemic around the world. It's pretty remarkable to think about science being able to have that kind of global impact, 5 billion vaccines doses already given. So clearly, Ugur is very mission driven. He started this so many years ago with just this idea, and it's hard to get people to believe in these ideas that early on. And so when you're super mission driven, I think the superpower that you get is actually your ability to bring people around you that are like-minded and also superpowered in their abilities in different areas. And I think, and I've seen it over and over again in the companies I invested in, where that company had a highly mission-driven founder. Invariably, they were able to hire way above their weight in terms of how much funding they had and the types of people they were able to attract. And I continue to see it to this day. And so I think that's the number one thing that mission-driven founders, how do they balance it? By using their mission to attract the flock, so to speak, around them that can then take all of these pieces forward. And by doing so, you can actually harness far more than you could by just trying to do everything yourself, because you're going to get way better people around you. And that's always what these great founders and CEOs do. They don't try to learn everything necessarily to do in the company. They bring in the very best people in the world around them.
Yeah, that just to echo that, I think one of the things that was in that segment that we didn't show there was your colleague Urshit did say, like, you know, the challenge for scientific founders, and one of the things that is a real superpower for them when they can pull it off, is they have to hire somebody who's better at the science to do the science for them if they're going to step into the CEO role, right? So it's kind of echoing exactly what you're saying there.
Yeah. No, exactly, and you just you just see it over and over again in the most successful companies. That's what actually happens.
Yeah, cool. So one kind of related question, but like, when you're evaluating these companies, I'm always curious about, like, how do you assess the qualifications? Because normally when you're talking to founders in maybe other fields, a lot of it comes down to gut feeling of, like, this is the person I trust. Like, they just have it. They have it, right? They have the drive. But in like a deep tech area, how do you assess the qualifications? Is it gut still, or is it a combination of gut and, like, looking at their CV and looking at their publications? Like, what do you do there for due diligence?
Oh man, that's ask 10 VCs and I think you'll get 10 different answers, sort of thing. Honestly, and I think, you know, there are VCs that could just they look at someone, or they meet someone, they're like, this is the person, right? Like, this is the person to back. I'm less that way. I care very much about the person. I'm people first, which is why I'm at Mayfield. But it's also really important that these founders have been able to attract great people around them, right? Build an amazing team with a North Star that is visible even when everything else is dark, and that's what guides great teams to big outcomes, because things will get dark at times and it won't be clear. It'll be hard to make decisions, and if you have a clear North Star, you're going to be able to make the right decision over time to get the company where it needs to be. And so it's evaluating people is it's a mixture of those things. You know, just their ability to tell a vision and a story is critical, especially at the earliest stages, at the inception stage of investing. If someone can't articulate why the company they're building matters, well, then forget it. Like, they could have the best technology in the universe, but like, and I think this is really important, right? You could build a great product, but to create something of lasting and incredible value, you have to build a great company as well. And so those are both things that we're looking for in founders, is not just pure technologists, but also people that understand how to bring in capital and then deploy it within their company to move that company's goals forward. So that's a rare thing, to be very honest. It's a very rare thing, and so it's why, you know, we don't. It's hard to find.
You're not writing checks every day, right?
That's the other way to put it. Yes, thank you, Darryl.
Storytelling is absolutely critical. I think that actually segues nicely into our next clip. On a completely different note, we caught up with the Houseplant crew for a conversation called Pot, Pottery, and Beyond. We asked about marketing in a heavily regulated industry like cannabis. Let's hear what Seth Rogen had to say about it.
How do you convey your message in a highly regulated industry and have the audience not perceive that you are jumping through a million regulatory hoops while conveying that message? And that's been a goal of ours for a long time, and honestly something we've learned from film. Like, there's a lot of stuff that you can and can't do, and there's more things you can and can't say than you would think, and the limitations of production is a box everyone has to work in, and those who thrive are the ones who find ways to make those obstacles not seem like obstacles. And that's really Sometimes a box is a good thing to work in because it forces you to really be even more creative than you would be. And I think the average person who's absorbing our information would not imagine that it's being vetted by, more lawyers than one should have.
So Arvin, I want to talk about this because you, with your background in science, obviously deal in these regulated industries a lot. And I think there's something specific about kind of vice startups as well. When you're talking to founders about marketing in these types of industries, what's your advice to them?
Man, so many regulated industries, right? I think it's interesting what Seth was saying, because he was saying two things at once, right? He was saying like, try not to explain that you're going through regulatory, but, work within the framework. And I take the stance that you always run towards regulatory with both arms out. And the reason is simple. I only want to work with founders and build companies that are built to last and could actually move the needle on global problems, which means you need to be very large and have massive impact. So regulatory has to be involved. I think it's easy to dodge, well, not easy to dodge regulatory, and I don't recommend it, but you can stay under the radar, is another way to put it, and stay small, right? Like, I don't know if Seth wants to IPO houseplants, right? But if he did, I think he would definitely need to go talk to regulatory, understand how do you actually do all this stuff in a way that fits with the regulatory environment of the government today. Now, that doesn't mean you can't change things over time, right? If regulatory is in one way, or it doesn't even exist for an industry, how can it change? SpaceX is a good example of that. Cell-based meats is another great example of that, where regulatory is now forming up and changing in real time as the public is starting to understand and grapple with, what does this actually mean as a solution for a global problem? And so I think running towards regulatory and working with everyone in order to scale your solutions is the right way to go. And again, like even the UFC, watch Dana White talk about that. And the UFC was about to die. They picked it up and then ran and worked with regulatory, and it became a multi-billion-dollar company. So over and over again, you see working with regulatory over time and shifting things is the way to go. And call me an optimist, but I think that's it is possible to work with the government and change things.
Wow.
So yes, I know. Call
Bold
me
statement.
an optimist.
for someone based in Silicon Valley, bold statement.
It requires patience. And I think that's one thing that is in shorter supply, in the Valley. But with the right amount of patience and pressure, it's amazing what can get done.
Right. I had a related question, which is just kind of less on the side of laws and regulations and more on the side of like public perception. So when we say regulated industries, obviously that covers a really wide swath of different types of companies and industries. But I'm thinking specifically of things like weed, where maybe the perception was previously like, this is a unsavory or criminal enterprise, right? And then as it's becoming regulated, as it's becoming more generally publicly available and accepted, like how do you help encourage that forward and deal with the kind of existing stereotypes and preconceptions that people have around those when you're trying to consumerize it?
So I think, I always say real revolutions have two parts, a social component and a technological component. And so you need both. The revolutions that are happening right now around some regulated industries, we'll just take, the houseplants example, right? And take the weed industry, ketamine, psilocybin, all of these traditionally recreational drugs that are now being used medicinally or therapeutically, have had a social component too. People like Rick Doblin at MAPS, working again with regulatory on ketamine and psilocybin as an actual therapeutic for depression, and others. And then the rest of society has moved in that direction as well. It's not like it's completely orthogonal to everything that's going on. So, as that's happening, you find these figureheads, these movement leaders. And that's, again, going back to the very beginning of our conversation, people like Uger, people like Rick Doblin, people that can see, oh, okay, we can create real change here. And yes, the world thinks one way, but I think differently. And I actually think I could push through that because there is real benefit to the world in this thing that no one thinks has benefit. And then you're going to push it through, right? So those are the founders we're looking for. I'm looking for, but I think like that's the way these sort of things that you think about the society has always thought one way about can change, like cell-based meats, like,
Right.
or plant-based food. Like, who thought that it would become this important? Well, climate change has really helped that along, right? So Gen Z and millennials are looking around saying, what can I possibly do to affect my own future? Well, I could vote with my dollars to buy new goods, different goods that are better for the environment. That's something I can do, and I will stick with that, right? So, and it's up to us as VCs and up to entrepreneurs to then fill in those categories of products that people could then vote with their dollars for. So I think the technological and social component are hand in glove in creating change.
100%. And, Arvind, you're always so dynamic. I wish we could talk to you for longer. And Daryl, you're perfectly tolerable. So thank you to both of you for hanging out with us on this segment of the Disrupt Desk. I appreciate you.
Thanks,
Jordan.
All right.